friends, it's that time again. We are back with the Gold and Steel show where we cover everything Vegas Golden Knights. And I'm here with my co-host Ian. I'm JP, and the fact that we're back means only one thing. It is time for the NHL hockey season to begin. It's a good time. It makes me a happy camper. It makes my co-host Ian a happy camper. Ian, it's good to see you, buddy. After a little break, we always take the off season off, but happy times, man. Hockey's back, right?
Yeah, starting to get in that feeling. We were just talking before we pressed record about preseason rust, so we've both probably got some.
Yeah. We'll dusting off the rust
nice.
A little bit.
It was nice.
Yeah.
Like, it was weird this year because last year, obviously, with Vegas winning, meant that we covered everything right until the end. So it felt like we had a really short off season.
Yeah.
And now this time, obviously, not quite as long as it could have been.
Yeah.
We had that a couple of years ago, but it was it felt long. So I had to work out what the on button was on the laptop and find out where I put the microphone and all those things. But it's good to be back.
Had to solve a few tech problems before we got started. But for our listeners, we just thought the most logical thing to do coming back here is just cover what happened in the off season. Who left, who joined the team. Most of us already know that, but let's do a deep dive on that stuff and then talk about where that leaves Vegas. Like, where does that leave the team going into this season? And we'll kind of cover each detail, all the players individually, and where that leaves us. That seems like the most logical place to start going into this next season of podcasts here. Obviously, Ian, this was the biggest turnover that this roster has ever seen in the existence of the team. We've never seen a turnover quite this large. And I know the general feeling among the fan base is that the team is now much worse than it once was and that they lost all these valuable people. I think what a lot of the fans are forgetting is that the roster was incredibly bloated. There are a lot of other factors, but the roster was so bloated with extra players through IR and a lot of the other cap things that going into the playoffs. I mean, we knew this was coming, right? This was not a surprise. But all the venom from the fan base, I was maybe a little shocked at how upset people were. Sometimes I feel like maybe people don't quite understand kind of the rules and math and how this all works. But what are your thoughts, Ian, on kind of the just general overview of what happened in the off season, and then we'll kind of get into some of the details.
No, look, so it's hard for me to comment on the general fan base feeling because obviously, and the listeners / viewers these days, they know that I decided to come off Twitter last year, or X, sorry, Elon. And I haven't gone back on that. I'm still not on there, but so I don't see that sphere, which I think is probably a good thing. Because it's easy to see a couple of hundred comments and think that represents the entire fan base when the reality is it doesn't. It represents a couple of hundred, and they're entitled to their views like everybody else is. But to then think they're the majority is a mistake. But the prediction that I remember talking about this in the off season last year, and obviously a very different conversation in the off season last year. You didn't have your lovely jumper, but we did. You had a big smile on your face because obviously they were the champs, right? And it was a case of how are they going to repeat this, and can they repeat this? And and one of the things I talked about in those preseason episodes was about the cap hell that was on its way, and arguably Vegas have kind of done their cap gymnastics over the last couple of years anyway, knowing that cap hell was kind of on the horizon. And then trade deadline, should I say, really cemented the fact that this offseason was going to be really tough for the Vegas, back office. Now, people may not like the moves they made. They may still feel bitter about them. That's okay. I remember people feeling the very same about Marc-Andre Fleury. But I think the Vegas fan base has to understand and has to know that the front office, I said back office, but the office, whichever is front or back, is there in win now mode, right? They're there to win. And what they're doing is trying to get the roster to work. The problem they now have is the same problem that I saw for many years, the good years of being a Chicago Blackhawks fan when we were winning things and we didn't suck. And in those years, every offseason that came around, it was Stan Bowman's job to juggle everything around to get back to the salary cap. And that meant that we lost players like Brandon Saad and others who were tough blows to take. I mean, Turbo, who's now gone back to Chicago this offseason, he left as part of those salary cap kind of gymnastics that every team has to do. So Vegas are in year 8 of their life, and it's been an amazing 7 years. They've been very lucky to have not had to have done this prior to this offseason. And I think that means that for a lot of the fans, it's a new feeling to lose fan favorites. Whereas I think a lot of other franchises are kind of, they're like, yeah, this is just what happens. And it doesn't make it right, doesn't make it nice. It just means that it is what it is. And I think when we go through the players, there are some that were tougher to swallow than others. There are some that are going to be hard to replace than others. And this is where Vegas is drafting and the AHL team, so the Silver Knights. We talked last season about how important Henderson was going to be going forward, and it really, really is. And this is why it's going to be so important, because as Vegas has to get rid of star players like Marchessault and others, their expectation then is that the next crop of Vegas talent has to come through. You have to have that mix of entry-level contracts that perform and veterans that are your mainstays. And we will talk about the roster in more detail at the end when we've gone through the ins, but that's going to be the make or break for me for Vegas this year, is can they make up Marchessault, Stephenson's, all these other players' numbers in what they've got? Because that's what they've got to do, because we know the regular season, last year wasn't good enough. And it meant that playing someone like Dallas in the first round is always going to be a problem. So I don't dislike all the moves. But the Marchessault one, I hate to say it, and I know this is going to, I can hear everyone clicking the off button already, but so sorry, I'm going to say it. I said it in the off-season last year. I didn't think he would stay. The amount of money that he was going to warrant being paid, it's not him being greedy. Now, I listened to an interview this morning, actually, of his final interview, really, as a Vegas Golden Knight, and I genuinely believe he wanted to stay, but the numbers didn't work. And they were never going to work because he's worth too much. And he is worth too much. Nashville have got a fantastic player in him. But that's hockey. That's life. That's the cap world we live in. If we didn't have that, you'd end up with what football has, or soccer, which is where you have 2 teams that win it every year, or one if you're in England. And that's not so. The salary cap does suck when you lose star players, but I do think the parity it creates gives us a much better product. But that's probably not going to make many Vegas fans feel much better right now. Yeah. So I'll just pat you on the back and say it does get easier. Trust me.
Yeah, and that's obviously the place to start is with Jonathan Marchessault. That was the most painful loss for sure. Recent Conn Smythe winner, part of the team's leadership, obviously a huge part of the team's offense, and just kind of a fiery personality, a fan favorite generally. So always painful to say goodbye, but I agree with you, Ian. It's a simple math issue on both sides. Jonathan Marchessault and Kelly McCrimmon, the general manager, both said that they tried to come to a deal, and Marchessault was interested in staying and McCrimmon was interested in keeping him, but they couldn't meet up on the numbers. And I think it's the prerogative of both sides. I don't think there's anyone in the wrong here. I think Marchessault is entitled to seek out as much money as he can. Let's face it, it's his last big contract. This is it. Nashville signed him at 5 years, $5.5 million AAV. That's his last big deal. The next time Marchessault signs a deal, if he doesn't retire before then, if he stays healthy, he'll be where most guys are at that age, signing a year at a time for much less money. And so this was his last shot. I get it. But McCrimmon also said that they couldn't justify a 5-year contract, particularly at that amount of money. I think they were willing to offer him 3 or maybe 4, but the math just doesn't play out in terms of what generally happens to players by the time they get to be that age. And so I get it. And here's the other thing. It's a salary cap thing. You can't just give every player everything they ask for, or you're going to end up being one of these bottom feeder teams that's weighed down with bad contracts. And this is the reason that Vegas is, in my opinion, that Vegas is able to contend year after year, because they make these hard choices, but these hard choices ultimately are what buy them another year of contention and keeps them able to be a contending playoff team every year. It's not going to last forever, but they have certainly, we're going into year 8 here, and we have not had a rebuild yet. This team has not done an actual rebuild. It hasn't happened. So they just retool. So it's, the Marchessault thing is definitely the most painful move, but I don't know. I mean, I don't understand what management was supposed to do. I don't think you can, in my opinion, you can't give the guy 5 years at $5.5 million.
I mean, let's say hypothetically they had have done, then the 14 forwards they have on the roster today, with the exception of some of the ones we're going to talk about a little later, who are the kind of the new kids on the block. Mm-hmm. They were all here. So who's going, right? So because Hurtlaw's already there, he's 6.75. William Karlsson would be the obvious person who would have left if it hadn't have been for Marchessault. And I think that's probably why the 3-year thing was bubbling around, because that's what Karlsson has left at 5.9. Barbashev's on $5 million for the next 4 years. Obviously, this is all starting from this year when I say these. Was on $3 million for the next 3 years. So there is 56% of or 56.5 to be precise, of the salary cap is in your forwards, which is not uncommon, by the way, but it is just show that, it's okay for people to say, well, they should have kept him. Right. Okay. Well, as of today, let's assume Leonard goes on LTIR, because he will. You're under the cap by about $1 million, $2 million, maybe at a push, depending on who goes up and down with roster players. But not enough to sign him. So somebody else off the roster was going to go. And I think what the McCrimmon and others have tried to do is to have a roster that's balanced. So it's not just all forwards and then there's no defense. I mean, you've got some expensive defenders in there. Noah Hanifin was a big choice at the trade deadline, and then obviously a choice in terms of re-signing him up. He's on $7.35 million. That's a big amount. Next season, you've got to re-sign, if you choose to, by the way, Shea Theodore. He's on $5.2 million. He's arguably one of the best defensemen in the league. He's not going to go for $5.2 million next year. That number's going to begin with an 8. Yeah, a 7 if you're lucky, and so then that's another $3 million you've got to find next year. So this is going to be new world now, and this is why I don't want to sound callous when I say, get used to it, because that's not what I mean in terms of it's going to hurt. Like Marchessault was Mr. Vegas, so to lose a player like that is always going to hurt, because he's arguably a franchise. Or part of it. Mark Stone would be another one that would be in that list, which to lose him would feel like a little bit of the identity of the team is gone. But if you don't do it, then the window closes very quickly. Very quickly. Because you can't. And when you get in that situation, this is exactly what happened to Chicago and Detroit and others, is when you get in this situation where you think you're keeping the window open, but in reality you're not. You're just prolonging your own pain, because you're never that competitive. So you're never really going to win a cup. Right. You're good enough to maybe sneak in the playoffs occasionally, and that's it. Once you get into that horrible situation, that's when all this goes pear-shaped. So I can understand why the GM and others are doing what they're doing in terms of the moves. The downside for the fan base is it means you're going to lose players that you don't want to lose, and that does suck. I do think, though, we can talk about this season, should I say, and expectations and predictions, maybe either later or on another podcast. But I'm going to call it right now, JP, and that is that this same conversation we're going to be having in a year's time, even if they won a Stanley Cup off the back of it, because I'm looking at what was cap friendly. It is now something that looks very similar to it, but isn't called cap friendly. Yeah. And I'm telling you now that 25-26 season, you've got a lot of UFAs and not a lot of money to make it happen. Now the cap might jump up massively next year, and I could look like an idiot saying this, but NHL history would say the cap doesn't tend to jump more than a couple of million, even when it's a quote unquote big jump. Yeah. So this isn't going to be the last time that you lose somebody you don't want to lose. And if the fan base has to see it as this is the necessary evil to still be in cup contention, because the second you stop doing it, you're basically saying, well, we're done, we're rebuilding, and that's not where the fans want Vegas to be.
Yeah, exactly. What the front office is showing is the poise. Everybody says that Vegas doesn't think about their future. I think they absolutely do. I just think they don't think about the future in the way that the traditional way that people define that. they're in win now mode, but they are thinking about staying in win now mode as long as they possibly can. And this is one of the ways they do that, by not, because it's not just Marchessault. This is the thing. When you have a championship team, you got all these guys that won a cup. And so they're going to command top dollar when it's time for them to sign.
That's right.
That's one of the cons of winning a championship, is now all the players on this roster are worth more money and they want to cash in, and that's their right. But what that means is if they gave every single one of these guys the money they were asking for, then other people would have had to go. There simply isn't room. They would have had to trade off other players to make room for these guys. It's just a simple math issue. And obviously we can't spend that amount of time on each player, but if we're kind of going through the list, the next biggest one, and he was asking for even more money, and I hate to see him go as well, Chandler Stephenson, signed with Seattle Kraken. He signed a 7-year deal at $6.25 million AAV. Folks, there is no way in burning hell that the Golden Knights could give Chandler Stephenson that amount of money for 7 years. Good for him. It's an amazing contract, but there is no way in hell that the Golden Knights were going to give him a term that long for that amount of money. This guy was a fourth line grinder playing 6 minutes a game when he joined this team. He was a value add. And yes, they gave him another contract, but it wasn't anywhere near that much money. So you have to understand that Chandler Stephenson was fitting into this roster as a high value player. He was a bargain. But once these guys earn their paychecks, you just run out of space. And that's another, it's hard to say goodbye to him. But when you hear that 7 years at that amount of money, no way Golden Knights were going to give him that.
To be honest, it was one of the contracts. You always hear about the kind of free agency bump. So it's cheaper to sign a player you can re-sign within your organization to go to the free agent market. And Chandler Stephenson is a prime example of someone who I think he's being overpaid. People may disagree with that. Yes, look, if Kraken win a cup, then they're not going to care how much they're paying him. So I get it. And they've got the ability to do that. Most of the teams don't. Vegas Golden Knights were in that similar position 6 years ago. The cap space to make those kind of moves happen. But the one thing that Stephenson will bring to the Kraken, did bring to the Golden Knights, is his face-off ability.
Yeah, he's a great face-off guy. Yeah,
he's one of the best in the league, and that's arguably why he's commanding that sort of money. There's the cup bonus, as you rightly said. You're 100% right with that in terms of that. That always means you can command a little bit of premium. Is he worth the same money as Thomas Hertl? I don't think he is. Personally, I would have rather have Hertl than Stephenson. Hertl, I think, brings more to the table than he does. But, Kraken obviously have different needs to the Golden Knights. And like we said about Marchessault, there's no way you can pay him that. Like, there's not, you've only got so many dollars to hand out. And it just couldn't happen. And again, you'd be paying somebody... You're looking at Barbashev, and I think actually in the center position, what you need is Carlson, Hertl, Eichel, and Roy probably to be your four. Brett Howden could maybe step into it. Brisson, I've seen him play center on the wing, but so maybe the fourth line's a bit weird. But you've got like Thomas Hertl this season when he's fully fit. Like he's almost like a new addition to the team. I know it's not going to feel like that because he joined at the deadline, but he wasn't fit for a lot last year. And I think a fully fit Thomas Hertl is a first line center in his own right. He'll play second would be my guess, with Eichel playing first line center. But so there really wasn't room for Stephenson in that roster anyway, unless you start shoving a center to the wing. So I think with that move, again, I'm not in the X sphere, but the Stephenson one, I think people understood more than the Marchessault one because there wasn't quite the emotional connection. But good luck to him, man. Like he's like you said, he's that classic. He wasn't this kind of amazing prospect who got paid millions of dollars the second that he got off his ELC. He had to earn this money. And to be fair to Chandler Stephenson, he's probably earned this 70. Is he getting overpaid? Probably. But, he's actually been a loyal servant for every club he's been at. And he probably deserves it from that side. And good luck to him at Seattle.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. absolutely good for him. Congratulations to him. If you're strictly looking at it from the Golden Knights perspective, and like you said, that's the Kraken don't have a Hurdle and an Eichel. Do you know what I mean? So it makes sense over there. He is going to be their star center. Like he's going to be probably their first line center, or between first and second line center, right? Obviously they're going to juggle the lines like all teams do, but here, right, you've got Eichel and Hurdle. That's number one and number two. And so exactly, that's the other thing. Where does Stephenson fit in? And where does Stephenson fit in for that amount of money? You're already paying Hurdle and Eichel,
Can't do it.
Yeah, you can't justify it. Exactly. So, but yeah, congrats to him. It's sad to see him go. He was a great player for this team. If we're going kind of through the list, there's a few others who were a little less painful, but like Carrier, it's sad to say bye to Carrier. He's one of the original misfits. I believe that whittles the team down to only 3 now. I think there are 3 left from the original team, if I'm not mistaken. If any of our listeners find that I'm wrong, please send us a message and correct me there. But I believe the only ones left now are Carlson, McNabb, and Theodore, I think, are the 3 original that are left. With Carrier, my understanding is they did not even make him an offer. So his contract was up and they didn't offer to re-up him. I understand that. Carrier's he's getting a little older. He's a depth player. That it's a logical, sad to see him go, but it's a logical decision.
And you have to move to a point where your depth players are prospects.
Yeah.
And Vegas has kind of held off that. The next 2 in the list that we're going through, I think, the next one maybe not so much, but the one afterwards definitely is in the same bucket as Carrier, which is he was going to take up a 4th line spot that I honestly believe you should be bringing through people from Henderson now, because you're going to need to do that for the future years,
Right.
So
who cost a lot less money. Yeah,
they do. And we're talking hundreds of thousands, right? I mean, okay, look, Carrier was never going to command kind of 3-4 million, but even at 1.5 million, and it's the ability to have the 2-way deal. That's a really important part of it as well. Being able to move people up and down and balance the roster like that, because that's a good way of making sure you've got some cap space at deadline. So,
right,
I got that.
And looking here, Carrier signed. I'm looking at the kind of the summary. The free agency summary, and Carrier apparently signed with the Hurricanes a 6-year deal at $2 million AAV. So once again, if he can get that kind of money, there's no way the Golden Knights were going to give him that. They certainly weren't going to give him 6 years, and they weren't going to give him $2 million because, as you said, they can fill that position with a prospect on a 2-way deal who's making a fraction of that money. I will miss Carrier. But it just, and I'm sure Carrier understood as well. Like I said, my understanding is they didn't even make him an offer. Whereas most of these guys, they did. A lot of these guys, they tried to keep him, but Carrier is one of the ones they decided to let him walk. Anthony Mantha is another one that they decided to let him walk. That's not a surprise. He was basically a rental unless he came in and performed extraordinarily well. He didn't really have time to adjust to the team. So they did not make Mantha an offer, and it's fine. Mantha found work elsewhere. It's all good. We suspected out of the 3 trade deadline acquisitions that he was the most likely to be a rental. We knew Hannafin and Hurdle were big splashes and that they were looking to keep them, but so no big surprise there. And he wasn't here long enough for anybody to get real attached to him, right?
No. And, there's things I like about Mantha's game. You kind of see him as a player, a decent amount of skill, a pretty good shot, a big body. I kind of don't really see how it hasn't worked better for him. It didn't really work in Washington. It didn't really work in Detroit. And obviously it didn't really work in Vegas either. So, good luck to him in the future. But I don't think that's a big loss. He didn't really add what I think Vegas thought he would add. I think they saw him as being a playoff player because of his size and his physicality. And I didn't see that in the in the small sample size of playoff games that we got, the 7 of them. But I didn't see that.
And he signed a 1-year deal with Calgary for $3.5 million. So that also speaks to how he's viewed in the market now. Like a 1-year deal, that's usually when teams don't have a tremendous amount of faith. It's more of a tryout almost. It's like, well, you're a pro. We'll bring you on. We're going to give you a shot. If you can prove yourself in a year, maybe you can earn, a little bit more money or whatever. But But yeah, wish him well. He wasn't around long enough for the fans to get super attached to him, so that one didn't sting quite as much. But Michael Amadio, that's another one. Sad to see him go. Same kind of deal. Just more money than they could justify paying him. Amadio is definitely more of a utility depth player. I think, a very good one, but I think kind of like you said, they're going to look to fill his position with guys like Dorofeyev and some of these guys that cost less money, these younger fellas. But looking here, it says Amadio signed with the Senators, a 3-year deal at $2.6 million per year. Once again, no way the Golden Knights were going to give him that. They did make him an offer, but 3 years, 2.6, I couldn't see them paying him that based on the current situation the team is in, right?
Yeah, no way.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's just, yeah, exactly. It's just an issue of all these guys, because they have a cup under their belt, they can command top dollar and even get some teams to overpay them. And good for them. Good for them.
You're right. Good for them.
But it's not for Vegas. It's not. If McCrimmon had signed all these guys at that kind of money, this team would be in trouble already, in my opinion.
They would be, yeah. And you would have had to have lost somebody who would fit. I mean, like, no offense to Amadio and Carrier, because it's not like they didn't contribute. They did, but yeah, combined that would have been $4 million of cap that you don't have. Like, it just doesn't work. And obviously there are teams in different situations. Like if you take, I always go back to Chicago, and people probably hate it, but anyway, it's the best example I've got, because they're a team that are trying to keep their salary cap at the floor without committing to stupid contracts, because they're awaiting people's like Bedard's contract and others. So, a $2 million 3-year deal for Amadio in Chicago wouldn't look stupid, because it makes sense given where they are and what they're doing. For someone like Vegas, though, it would be pretty dumb. So I got that one. I think the ones that we're going to talk about in a minute, these are the ones that are, again, we saw coming, but they just hurt a little bit more. Yeah,
definitely. Oh yeah, they definitely sting. In our agenda, I'm going to skip over a couple, and then we'll get to goaltending, or the goalies, because that's obviously one of the pain points in this offseason for sure. But so obviously Martinez, you're talking about the Blackhawks. So Martinez moved on. They did not extend him an offer, and he is now a Blackhawk. He signed for 1 year, $4 million. Totally makes sense that when Hanifin came in, we all kind of knew somebody was probably going to go. And I think most people who were fairly educated on the roster had a feeling Martinez was probably done. Look, he's getting older. He was an amazing addition to this team, and that guy is tough as nails. Total shot blocker. Love Martinez, always will. But he's getting towards the end of his career, and $4 million, good for him. I'm glad he could get it. Once again, the Golden Knights we're not going to give him that, and as far as I know, I don't think they extended him an offer at all. I think we had 8 defensemen once Hanifin came in, so somebody had to go, and Martinez was the logical choice.
And he has spent more time on the physio table than the others.
He gets hurt a bit more.
That's what I mean. And he's a tough player, but the body can only take so much for so many years. But again, it makes total sense to Chicago to make that move. They've got a lot of young defensemen. Imagine having somebody like Martinez there to learn from, to use as almost like a role model, a little bit like they did with some of the forward signings they made last year, to kind of pad the youth and the experience around. Whereas again, Vegas, they don't need that. They've got that in spades with Petch and Hanifin, Theodore, McNabb, Whitecloud. I mean, that's your defensive group. And maybe it's because I hadn't looked at it for a couple of months, because we were in the off season, sunning ourselves, all the rest of it. Well, that's a strong. Like, if you think your top 2 lines, your kind of top 4, if you will, is Pietrangelo, Hanifin, Theodore, and then arguably McNabb or Whitecloud, depending on how they mix the pairs up. But that's a really good, strong defensive core. You've got Hagen there as well. Hutton did a job last year, so he was okay. So, as your 7th defenseman, your decor is done. There's nothing to be done. Like, that's a strong, it's a problem for next year. But right now, in terms of 24-25 season, I'm not looking at that thinking that needs Martinez. I'm looking at it thinking that's a very good D.
Oh, still one of the best cores in the league, in my opinion. We don't have any concerns in the defense department.
Nope.
So looking at the rest of the list here, and this will lead us into the conversation about goal. Cotter was traded, actually. So Paul Cotter, another depth player, bit of a fan favorite, was traded in a move. And I'm now off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly, but this was contributed to some of the new players that came in.
I think the same. So I actually have that in front of me, mate. So,
Tell me what's the deal on that trade, because that's going to lead us into the goal conversation, I think.
Yeah, so that's right. So it was Cotter and a third went to New Jersey for Alexander Holtz and Akira Schmid, who obviously we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
That of all the trades the moves that Vegas did, that's the one I thought was really interesting. We can obviously flick to the goalies in a second, but very quickly on Alexander Holtz. When he was drafted, he's 22, right? He's a right winger. He's a right shot as well. He was seen as being, I can't remember, he may have been top 10 first round. He was a first round pick anyway by New Jersey Devils. And there was a lot of hope that he was going to turn into this top 6 player. Now, okay, it didn't. It hasn't happened for him in New Jersey. And obviously he's found himself on the expendables list. But for Vegas, who don't have a ton of prospects because they traded most of them away, let's be honest, having him and Brisson possibly on a line together, that's quite an interesting look at what possibly could be a future top 6 line for the Golden Knights in a couple of years. So I'd be interested to see how Holtz steps up. His numbers aren't exactly fantastic in New Jersey, to be honest, but I do think with someone like him, you're looking at what he can become rather than what he is. He still had 28 points, by the way, in 82 games last season, 16 goals, 12 assists.
Yeah.
That's not bad for somebody who, other than 19 games the year before, it was kind of really like his first full season. So he could be an interesting kind of bottom 6, like a scoring depth player, maybe. And let's see where he goes. But that, to me, made sense. Whereas, again, Cotter kind of fit, or was fitting, should I say, beforehand, into that same mold as Carrier and others being. He wasn't quite good enough to break the top 6, which is, I think, is what they originally hoped for Cotter, is that he would become this kind of gritty top 6 forward. And he isn't. He's really a top 9. And I think because of that and the cap situation, everything else thrown in, I think it's a good move. Like, it's 2 very young players. The goalie's young as well. We can talk about him in a second. But it makes sense.
Yeah, and I always have hope for any player that hasn't made a big splash in the league that the Golden Knights bring in. They've proven historically that they're very good at finding value in players that just haven't found a home yet, they've done this time and time again. Yeah. So my hope is always that players like Holtz, that he might be another one of those. But I do think another thing that motivated this, obviously, and this will lead us into the goalie conversation before we get to some of the other acquisitions. I think they knew that they needed to beef up the goalie pipeline a little bit, because obviously one of the other painful losses was Logan Thompson moved on. And everybody probably knows this by now, but I think it's important to emphasize that Logan Thompson requested a trade. The Golden Knights weren't necessarily looking to move Thompson, but Thompson, and once again, this is his right, Thompson wants to be the number 1 somewhere. And here in Vegas, Hill was kind of the guy. They were sharing the net, though, right? It was kind of a A1 and an A2 situation with Hill being the one. And, Thompson wants to be the number 1 somewhere. And he requested a trade, and Vegas honored that. So now he plays for the Capitals. And so I don't know how anybody could be upset about that. I mean, if Thompson wanted out, it's his right to want to be. Here's the thing, though. In the NHL, the A1, A2 thing is getting more common. Like the sort of starter and backup, the traditional starter and backup arrangement is getting less and less common. But even A1 and A2, I get it. Thompson wants to be number 1. And right now, he's not. Hill is the guy. And so I get it. And so I think the Golden Knights were thinking, we need to beef up the pipeline, and they did that in a couple ways. One of them was Schmidt, right? He's going to be the number 3 in the Cotter deal, and then we'll talk about the number 2 next. But what were you gonna say?
So, so again, predicted last season, we talked about Aiden Hill when he got his contract, that what it meant was that the two contracts, Hill and Logan Thompson's entry-level contract, were going to end the same year, which is this year, to 24-25 season, which meant that at the end of this season, the Vegas Golden Knights, even if he hadn't requested a trade, we're going to have to make the tough choice, which is, so who you're keeping, because you can't keep both because they're too expensive. The 1A, 1B situation does work until 1B wants a 1A contract and then it all goes to pot. But that is so what you tend to find is that every year the 1B changes because you're looking for somebody who is either an up-and-coming goalie who can compete, and do 30% of the load out of the season, maybe 25, 35 games of the 82. And then on the other side, you're looking for somebody who's got a cheap enough contract that you're not going to put $4 million into the backup goalie position, which is effectively what you end up doing. So it's hard to do. I think the Schmidt move makes sense. He had a reasonable time in New Jersey, wasn't lights out. Now, ironically, a season ago, if this trade had happened at the end of the 22-23 season, people would have probably had a lot more hope because he had a very good kind of start to his career. He played 6 games beforehand, but they were on and off. He actually got a decent stint at the end of 22-23 when New Jersey were pretty dreadful. And he had a .922 save percentage. Last season on 19 games, it was .895. He is a potential goalie. I mean, he's 24, so he's not exactly young, but at the same token, we know the goalies tend to mature. Well, not as in people, by the way, for people think I'm saying that the goalies are immature, but mature as in terms of their ability later than players. So it's not uncommon for a 20. I mean, like Logan Thompson is a great example of that. Someone who slightly later in his career starts to become the starter that people hoped he would be, but just didn't see it in his early 20s. And there's countless. I mean, Corey Crawford. There's loads of players that would fall under that same mold. So I get that move. The one I don't understand, and it's the one bit that I'm kind of like, is Ilya Samsonov. And you called it number 2. That's, in my opinion, what he's been for in his past 2 is because he was pretty crap in Toronto. He was pretty crap in Capitals, and I find him quite a frustrating goalie because there are times when he goes through spells and I'm like, this guy could be a starter, and then he goes through spells where you're like, this guy probably shouldn't be in the league. And goalies, obviously it's a very kind of confidence-based position anyway, but he's got to prove himself. If we talk about Manta getting that 1-year deal in Calgary being a prove yourself deal, this $1.8 million that Samsonov is earning, that's a prove yourself deal. That's a we know you've got the potential to be a 1B. Now show us. And the Schmidt.
So to clarify, just for our listeners, Samsonov signed a 1-year deal. Vegas signed him to a 1-year deal at, what did you say, $1.8 million. So it's a tryout deal, kind of. Yeah.
It is, because he just hasn't been the player that people hoped he. Again, when he came into the league, and he's been in the league since the 2019-2020 season, obviously at Washington for 3 years. Like he looked really good. Like he was being talked about in the same conversations as Shesterkin, as other players.
I remember that.
That were like, who are now, Saros, others that were now elite goalies that you would pay top dollar for. And Samsonov was in that same conversation. Sorokin, isn't it, the guy who's at the Islanders? Like he was another one. They were all in this kind of little mix of potential goalie prospects, and he just fell away. Now he finished last season on 40 games with an .890 save percentage, and that's a team that Toronto were a good. As much as it pains me to say this, are a good team, right? Okay, they haven't won anything yet, but they're good. They've got good defense. They've got good offense. Like they're a good team. So to have an .890 save percentage, that's kind of on you, not on, you can't
on
the
blame
defense.
It, can't blame it on the defense. Yeah.
And then the year before, though, 42 games, so pretty much the same sample size, still at Toronto, a .919 save percentage. That's the sort of save percentage that your elite goalies want. Yeah. And this is where I think with him, like you just see his save percentage, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So I find him really frustrating. Now, if he can be as good as he was in the 2022-23 season and have a .920 save percentage, what a backup you've got. and that's great. If he doesn't, and if he craps the bed and he does become a quote unquote number 2, then he's going down to the AHL and Schmidt comes in. And that's where the Schmidt thing helps. He's on a 2-way contract anyway, I believe. I can't see it in front of me right now. But will we see Schmidt in the season? Yes, because there'll be injuries. But he's brought in on the backup basis that if Samsonov plays like he did last season, he's done. Yeah. He'll go into the AHL and that's him done.
And to clarify, a lot of our listeners probably already know this, but to clarify the goalie picture now, we did not mention that Jiri Patera, who was kind of the number 3, also moved on. He signed with Vancouver. So that's why the team needed a number 3. So that the hierarchy probably going into the season, at least as it stands now, is going to be Adin Hill. It's Adin Hill's net. Samsonov is probably the number 2, with Schmidt being the number 3. And I'm sure we will see, like you said, we're going to see Schmidt at some point, and he'll get his shot. The number 3 almost always makes an appearance. Sometimes the number 4 even makes an appearance. But you're not going to get through a season without seeing Schmidt in the net at some point, probably. So it's my only hope, like you said. I remember when they signed Adin Hill, everybody was like, who? Who the hell's this guy? Very unremarkable numbers. He was kind of rotting away over in San Jose, and everybody's like, well, I guess we'll see. And now he's turned out to be, it's his net, and he's turned out to be a pretty great. Obviously, this is a very goalie-friendly team. We know this about the Golden Knights. It's a goalie-friendly team, and so maybe that pumps up the goalies' numbers a little bit when they're on this team, and Samsonov may benefit from that as well. But I don't think there's any doubt that Hill has proven that he's a starting NHL goalie. And when he first came to the team, it was like, who's Adin Hill? Nobody was impressed at all. And so my hope is that with Samsonov, the goalie coach for the Golden Knights, is also seeing some untapped potential. And a lot of times goalies come here and they do better. So we'll see. That doesn't apply to all of them. Like obviously the Subban fiasco back Brossoit, and in the early days, like Malcolm Subban. He never could find his groove, in Vegas. So it doesn't work for every goalie. But
no, he didn't find his groove anywhere, to be fair.
He was a true backup behind Fleury as well. So. But that's kind of the goalie picture, right? Is that a correct?
That's right. It's right. I want Samsonov to be good, so I don't want to sound like I'm writing him off before the season even starts.
But his stats are his stats.
That's his stats show me a player that can't be consistent, and that's the one thing. Like even if he was a 9-12 rather than 9-19 or a 9-11 and 9-09 or something like that, that's still. Anything above kind of 9-7, 9-8, that's a very good NHL save percentage. So there's a lot of goalies in the league who earn big dollars, kind of around that margin. Yeah, it's that consistency you want in net. So is Hill one of the best?
Adin Hill.
I nearly went the whole podcast without ruining it. Adin Hill, what name? But is he the best goalie in the NHL? No. But he is consistent. He was consistent last year, and he was the year before. And I think there's a lot of teams that would pay big money for Adin. He's your problem next season, by the way, because he is a UFA this year. We're talking about the front office and all the work they've got to do. It hasn't stopped, by the way, because they've got to sort out all these UFAs that are coming up at the end of next season. Because let's not kid ourselves. Those conversations already have started, which is players such as Brett Howden, Kolasar. Less important, of course, but still there. Shea Theodore, Braden McNabb, who will be 34 at the end of this season. Do they re-sign him? Arguably not. But Adin Hill is one 28-year-old goalie, won a Stanley Cup, played very well last season. You can't really put the kind of poor season on him, I wouldn't say. People will throw money at him, and his agent's not stupid. Like they will know that. So. He could easily command 7 million, maybe 6.5, 7 million, something like that. And he's currently on 4. So, he's we're going to see this a lot over the next couple of years, but next year especially. So Samsonov has the ability to throw the cat amongst the pigeons if he wants to, and be so good that actually it makes the Vegas front office think, who do we resign? But
right.
There's this voice in my head saying he will, his true form will show eventually, and he'll go back to his 890 self.
And if he does find his form and do well, then he's going to command more money as well when the time comes, because he will, like you said, he will have proven himself. But and speaking of, so we already if we're going to talk about the players that the team picked up, we already mentioned Schmidt, we already mentioned Holtz. Another player that's on a bit of a sort of tryout deal, or a bit of it's not really a bridge deal, but similar kind of thing, is Olofsson. Obviously, they were very conservative in they didn't offer a lot of big contracts, big money. They were smart. They had to do that. But yeah, Victor Olofsson signed a 1-year, $1.1 million deal. How do you see Olofsson? Is this this is a depth signing as well? This is a guy. Is he kind of a middle six forward? How do you see him?
I would say middle six. He's a bit in the Samsonov mold in terms of that he has had some very good years and he's had some very lean years. It's a bit of like the Buffalo curse in terms of players tend to get hot and then they get cold and then they get hot, and you're kind of going, what are you? Are you a top six? Are you a bottom six? Because every year you change. I mean, I'm looking at his stats right now, and obviously he's been at Buffalo his entire career. He 20 goals in his first proper season, which was the 2019-2020 season. Obviously, we had all the COVID crap, so that messed around with some of these stats. But arguably, he's been around, in terms of goals, the 20-goal mark for his first 4 seasons, except for the COVID year. 28 goals in the 2022-23 season. I mean, if he repeats that and he scores 40 points for Vegas on a third line, great. Wondering where some of your Marchessault goals are going to come from. Well, there's your man.
That would make him a huge value signing. Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
But last season, he played 51 games. It is, because he scored 7 goals. And now, it's a smaller sample size than 75, but he hasn't played 82 games in a single season in his career. I would say he's a risk, but actually at £1 million, is he that much of a risk? Not really. So it makes sense for him. He's our Manta, right? He's our see what you can do. If he scores and if he goes back to his 2021 to 2023 form, and he plays 70 odd games in the season and he scores 25 goals and puts up 50 points, he'll get a deal, because Vegas will want to keep him. He's 29, so he's not that old. And he's obviously a loyal player, because he stayed at Buffalo for a long period of time. And he is the sort of player where don't be surprised if he gets scratched if he doesn't play, because you won't want him holding a spot that, for instance, a Brisson could have if he's not putting up the points. Right.
Yeah. He could be the guy that's in the press box here and there, depending. All these guys could, right? Honestly, all the forwards I think all qualify as depth signings. There's only one more we haven't discussed, one more signing, which is Zach Aston Reese. And I'm looking here. He signed a deal for, it wasn't much. Am I looking at the right? Oh yeah, here we go. 775,000. So he didn't even get $1 million, and it's a 1-year deal and it's a 2-way contract, meaning he can go back and forth. He could wind up in Henderson for the whole season. So,
and don't be surprised if he does.
Yeah, he can start there
at all. Yeah. Well, he played 3 games last season for Detroit. He played a fair bit for Toronto the year before. He's not a bad player, but I do think
depth signing.
Total injury protection.
And this is even, it's depth, and this is the guy that, especially a 2-way deal, that's good chance he'll spend some time in Henderson this year, I think.
Like if you're buying a Golden Knights jersey and you're wondering who to get on the back,
maybe not. Maybe don't start with Aston Reese.
Aston Reese.
So those are the acquisitions. We've sort of gone through who left, who joined. And not surprised, there wasn't much cap space, so I'm not surprised that it was mostly depth signings. I think based on the fan reaction, I think it's important to put things in a little bit of perspective when we look overall at where the roster's at and what we can expect this season, don't forget, everyone, that this team was incredibly bloated going into the playoffs because of the various LTIR and IR situations, because of trade deadline acquisitions. This team was well over the cap, as we know, super, super bloated. So this team was beyond a contending roster. If you look at the roster now, it is still very much a playoff contending roster. Don't forget who's still on this team. Because I saw a lot of, oh my gosh, we've stripped the team bare. I even heard some people using the word rebuild. And I was saying, no, this is not a rebuild. Like, have you seen a rebuild? This is not that. This is just the fallout from winning a cup. Don't forget, guys, we still have Mark Stone. We still have an amazing decor that we talked about earlier. We still have Barbashev, Hurdle, Carlson, Wah. This team is still totally stacked. And don't forget that McCrimmon will continue to work his magic throughout the season. Don't think that they're done. If they see an opportunity to do a deal, they will most certainly do it. And they will most certainly pick somebody up at the trade deadline, assuming the team is in a playoff position. So I think the team, were they stronger last year at this time? Probably a little, but not by a lot. But what are your thoughts, Ian? Maybe I'm a little biased. I still think that this is a contending roster.
Definitely biased, but I don't think you're wrong. I just think you're biased. but the way that the roster is shaped up at the moment, I think is there are very few teams in the NHL that wouldn't look at the Vegas Golden Knights and say, "I wish I had that roster."
Right.
To class it as a rebuild is somewhat
no
funny.
Way. Yeah.
because I've seen what a rebuild actually looks like, and I can tell you
this
now
is not
it's horrendous. And you get to a point where you're like, I don't even care about the 82 games anymore. So and this is not the case. Like the division and the conference that Vegas are in is getting tougher. The West is getting stronger again. There are teams that I think have really bolstered. Nashville obviously is one of them. Let's not kid ourselves. The addition of Marchessault and Stamkos is two really big moves. Shows they're very much in win now mode. And they were on the periphery last year. The kind of rubbish teams will still be the rubbish teams, and I include Chicago in that. They might be slightly not as crap as last year, but they'll still be in that kind of bottom end. And the San Jose Sharks will be another one in there. But when you're in a division that has people like the Kings, when it has people like, and obviously a conference now, Colorado, Dallas, all those guys, you need a roster that's up there. And I think Vegas have got that. The question marks are clear, and we can talk about this a lot more in detail on another podcast, but can they replace what they've lost? So who's going to step up? Like that next man up mentality that we know that every hockey club has to have, that's what they need now. So who's going to step up and make up what Marchessault brought to the table, both in terms of goals, assists, but actually in terms of in the locker room as well? Like, who are the new voices? Who's the new misfits that are going to come together and are going to be the face and the kind of culture behind that franchise going forward? Obviously Stone's there and Eichel's there, but you need people like Hurdle to really show what they can do this season and perform at the level that their contracts would expect. So if that all happens, then I don't see why you don't make the playoffs. Do I think you win your division? I think it's hard. It's going to be hard this year to do that, but it's not impossible. Vancouver always that kind of where are they going to be? Don't know. Seattle are another one, which is, are we going to get Seattle from last season or 2 seasons ago? Don't know. It's a tough division.
Edmonton is going to make a lot of noise again this year, I would expect as well. Yeah,
I'm sure. And this is what I mean in terms of and that's before we start talking about Calgary and others. Like the West is pretty stacked. We talked about parity earlier. That's very true. But I think they've got a solid roster. And as much as I know people don't like the moves that they made, I think in hindsight, they'll look back and go, you know what, that was kind of needed to be done. So all in all, I think the Vegas Golden Knights have had a pretty good offseason. It's longer than they would have wanted it to be, but they had a pretty good one. The question now will be, will some of these swings, will they pay off? Like, will Holtz pay off? Will he become the kind of potential top 6 forward that New Jersey thought they had when they drafted him 7th overall? I mean, will Olofsson perform like he did 2 seasons ago? There's always question marks going into a season, but I think it's a good position. Good position. There's not many teams that wouldn't want this roster.
Mm-hmm. And I do think, just like the season before they won the cup, I do think a long off season benefits a team in a lot of ways.
It does.
And doing a lot of deep runs season after season for that core that's there for that whole thing, it really wears you down. And it was pretty impressive to watch the Panthers go to the final twice and win it the second year. It's incredibly hard to do. So I think there's always some hidden benefits in a longer off season. And obviously last year, health was a huge issue for the Golden Knights after that long Stanley Cup run. And that's not an uncommon thing. So hopefully that will be a beneficial thing going into this season. Hopefully injury won't be as big an issue. And I agree with you. I'm excited to see a full season of Hurdle once he's settled in and gotten comfortable. He didn't get a chance to do that, right? He sort of jumped into the playoffs healthy-ish, but not really back to full form. And so a lot to look forward to. And I'm just excited that hockey's back, man. It's especially when it's a longer off season, you just feel like you're never going to see hockey again. So it's a good time to be a hockey fan, good time to be a Golden Knights fan. And for our listeners, if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas for episodes that you'd like to see from us this season, please share those with us. You can do that with a mailbag feature at our website, which is goldandsteel.vegas, or the easiest place to reach us is on our X profile, which is at goldandsteelvgk. So we'd love to hear from you. And even if you just want to argue with us and tell us that our opinions are totally bunk, we'd still like to hear from you. It's fun to debate this stuff. So thanks again, folks. It's great to be back, and thanks for joining us. And we're looking forward to another great season. What is Ian? What is this for us now? Is this our third full season or our fourth? I think this might be going into our fourth season of the show now.
I think it's fourth. Obviously, we've changed names a few times, so,
yeah.
So it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, I don't think it might be our fourth season.
It's fourth, yeah. We said it's fourth.
I'm excited to be doing this again, man. It's I'm glad. It's as we speak, the rookie camps are going on. So we're now approximately, maybe a couple of weeks away from our first preseason games. So
yeah, and then we're about a month away, aren't we, from the real deal starting. But
can't wait.
So.
Looking forward to it.
Good.
So we'll come to you next time, guys, for our listeners, with probably our next episode will be as the season is about to kick in, I'm guessing, or around the time the season kicks in. So thanks again for joining us, folks. Enjoy the rest of, I guess it's officially fall now. So here in Vegas, enjoy these cooler temperatures as they start to kick in, and we'll see you here in a couple weeks. Ian, good to see you, buddy, and we'll check back in here a couple weeks from now.
Yeah,
thanks, folks. Talk to you soon. Stay safe. Stay well. Bye-bye.